Hello everybody and welcome back to another day of 7th grade math here. We spent the last few days talking about probability, simple probability, with both theoretical and experimental. And a lot of times things that go hand in hand are probability and statistics. So today we're kind of moving on to our little bit of statistics stuff mixed in with our probability. So today we're going to be talking about histograms. So a few definitions before we get going here. Frequency first is the number of times a data item occurs. So when you take a set of data, whether you're gathering it or given a set, the frequency is, so there's going to be multiple things in that data, and the frequency of one item is how many times you see it within the data set. So we'll see that here pretty soon. So the interval is the space between two things. So if you're taking a tally of heights, a height interval, one of the height intervals that you could use would be 5'4" to 5'7" would be one interval, and then 5'8" to 5'11", let's say, could be another interval, and you'd be taking tallies of how many people fit within that height range. And a frequency table is going to be a table that lists each data item with its frequency. So it lists the item and how many times it occurred. So we'll see some of that here in a minute. And a histogram is used to show the frequency of the data. So it gives us a visual representation of how many times something happens within each interval. So if that sounds confusing, we'll see it here soon. So there are no spaces between the bars like we saw last year with bar graphs. The height of each bar gives the frequency of the data. So how tall the bar is will tell us how many times that piece of data occurred within our set. So the data is grouped in equal sized intervals that do not overlap. These are good for displaying continuous data. Continuous data. Such as height or weight or time, or there's many things that we can do. We see some things with bar graphs here. So just a couple of notes from last year that you did with bar graphs. So bar graphs are used to compare data. It groups data into categories. So that's one of the big differences. Bar graphs, you can switch the things around without having any bad things happen. And there are gaps between each of the bars. So histograms are used to show distributions of data, so how the data is spread between these intervals. It groups the data into even intervals instead of categories. We can't reorder the bars because those intervals are going from the lowest amount we're looking for to the highest amount. And then another difference is there are no gaps between the intervals like up here. So we got gaps between the categories. There are no gaps here between intervals. All right, so we're going to create a frequency table and a histogram. So we'll need to collect data. I know us at home we aren't here in class with everybody, and I'm taking the data that we're going to collect today. So I'm just going to give you a random set of data. So the number intervals based on that data, so that's going to be given to us here. We don't have to worry about that, and then we'll record the frequency with tallies, count the tallies to tell how many are in the frequency, or the frequency is how many, so we'll name the frequency, and then we will create our histogram. So let's go ahead and just say that there are 3 students with the number of letters in their first and last name being between 5 and 10. So 5 to 10 letters in your first and last name. And then 11 to 16, we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, let's call it. And then 17 to 22 letters, let's go ahead and call that, you know what, let's add a couple more here, 12. And 17 to 22, we will say that, I don't know, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. So the intervals are already done for us. That's what we just counted. 5 to 10 is an interval, 11 to 16 is an interval, and 17 to 22 is our last interval. So now we're going to give the number frequency for how many times we saw tallies. So we had 3 students here with 5 to 10 letters in their first and last name. We had 12 students with 11 to 16 letters in their first and last name, and we had 5 students with 17 to 22 letters in their last name. So we are going to label this thing. Sorry, give me 1 second here. We can go ahead and title this, "How many letters are in your name?" All right, so what we want to do is say how many things each of these will be worth. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 spaces. So that's not going to quite work for us having 12 people in one of our frequencies. So we're going to make each of these be worth 2. So first let's title the axis. So this is frequency on the side here. Or that's also how many students had this happen. And our x-axis title is the number of letters in the name. So we've got all our titling done. So we said each one of these will be worth 2. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. We're not going any higher than 12, so I'll just stop counting at 16. So what we're going to do here is make bars that show us how many students were in that range. So we said we had 3 with 5 to 10 letters in their name. So we are going to create a mark here showing that we didn't have 4, we were in between 2 and 4 with 3 people. And we can go ahead and fill that in. And now, since we had 12 people with 11 to 16 letters in their first and last name, we are going to mark off at 12, because that's how many people had that going on. I'm going to go ahead and choose a different color to fill in here. You don't have to, but just so we can see the different bars without getting too confused. So that represents the 12 people that we had in our class that had 11 to 16 letters in their first and last name. And then finally we had 5, so we are going to mark off in between 6 and 4 because that's where 5 lives. And finally another color, let's go with green for this. So there are 5 students with 17 to 22 letters in their name. And that's as hard as it needs to be to make a histogram. So there are many important things here, though, we got to remember. We've got to title our histogram. We've got to title our y-axis and title our x-axis. And then obviously we need to count data, take some data, in order to build this thing. So when you're making your own intervals, you just want to be sure that you're making the same. So we notice that 5 to 10 includes, we have a gap of 5. 11 through 16, we have another gap of 5. And 17 through 22, we have another gap of 5. So that is making histograms right there. So another thing we can do is use histograms in order to talk about the data that we gathered. So here we have a histogram that shows how many hours people spend on social media per week. So once again, this tells us the number of people who spend how many hours on social media. So how many people are represented by this histogram? Well, the nice thing about this is the frequency tells us. So we know that there are 8 people who spend 0 to 4 hours on social media. There are 14 people who spend 5 to 9. 10 people who spend 10 to 14 hours, and 6 people who spend 15 to 19 hours per week on social media. So to find out how many people are represented in our histogram, we just have to add all these together. So 8 and 14 is going to give us 22, plus 10 will give us 32, and plus 6 will say there are 38 people represented in our histogram here. So how many people spend between 5 and 9 hours on social media? Well, we've already taken a look and recorded that up at the top. There's 14 who spend 5 to 9 hours. So we'll just mark that as a 14. How many people spend at least 10 hours? So that means 10 hours or more, right? So here's our 10-hour mark, and we're looking for everything to the right of that. And so this bar of 10 people plus this bar of 6 people is going to tell us that there are 16 people who spend at least 10 hours on social media. And then finally, what percent of the people spend less than 5 hours on social media per week? So that's going to be this bar here, right? 0 to 4 is going to be less than 5. So there are 8 people total who spend 0 to 4 hours out of the 38, right? So what we need to do is turn that into a decimal first, because to do that, all we have to do is divide. So let me open up my calculator here. And we are going 8 divided by 38 is 0.2105. So I'm going to call that just 0.21. And so turning that into a percent, all I have to do is move that decimal over twice, and we get 21%. So there are 21% of the people in our data set spend less than 5 hours on social media per week. So nothing too difficult with histograms. Making them is pretty easy. There's just a couple things we gotta remember, and then we can use histograms that are given to us to see different things about the data that we might be asked. So, looks like that is all for today. So there is an assignment in Canvas after this, so be sure that you get that done. Picture taken, turned in as usual. And also, there is an IXL to get done as well. So you will be working on BB9 on IXL after you complete your assignment. So the assignment might have you making some histograms. Let me just take a look at it real quick to let you know what you can expect. Nope, so you don't have to even make a histogram for your assignment. There's just 15 questions that ask you different questions about a histogram that you're given. So it's going to be a lot like we saw right here in our examples, just a few more questions than we did there. So as always, if you get stuck or have any questions, feel free to send me an email, send me a message on Canvas, and I will reply to you to help you out as soon as I can. So remember, assignment and IXL, and then you are done for math for the day. So I hope you guys enjoy your weekend, and I will talk to you on Monday for the next lesson.